summer of 1974 was unusually hot in Coldwell, a quiet Midwestern town with less than 9,000 people. Life moved slowly there. Church on Sundays, baseball games on Fridays, and kids chasing fireflies through open fields long after sunset. Coldwell was the sort of place where doors stayed unlocked and neighbors waved when they passed by. Nothing bad ever happened there, or so people like to believe. It started with whispers. In June, a trucker reported seeing a woman wandering along Highway 17 just after midnight. He described her as tall, wearing a pale dress, but when he slowed to offer help, he realized something that made his skin crawl. She had no face. He swore she turned toward his headlights, a blank oval of skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. He panicked, swerved, and nearly crashed into a ditch. By the time he looked back, she was gone. The police dismissed it. Too many hours on the road, fatigue, maybe booze, they said. The trucker insisted he hadn't been drinking, but in Coldwell, people laughed at the idea of a faceless woman walking the highway. 2 weeks later, the whispers grew louder. Teenagers claimed they saw her standing near the abandoned Sinclair gas station on the edge of town. One boy, Jeff Miller, said she moved like she was gliding, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. When he shouted at her, she vanished into the cornfields without a sound. Then came the children. On July 8th, 2 sisters, ages 7 and 9, told their parents they saw a woman with no face standing at the edge of their yard after dark. She was pointing at their window. Their father checked, found nothing, and scolded them for making up stories. But the next morning, in the dirt just beneath the window, were footprints, bare, thin, too large to belong to either child. The town began to take notice. Sheriff Harold Wilkes organized a small patrol, more for show than real concern. He told the local paper, "There's no such thing as a faceless woman. People are letting their imaginations get the better of them." Still, more reports came in. Farmers working late said they saw her watching from the edge of their fields. A couple driving home swore she appeared in the middle of the road, forcing them to brake hard. When they got out to confront her, she was gone. Always the same description: a woman in a pale dress, no face. By August, the laughter stopped, because people began to vanish. The first was Mary Collins, a 28-year-old waitress at the diner on Main Street. She finished her late shift, waved goodbye to her co-workers, and started the short walk home. She never arrived. Her bicycle was later found leaning against a fence along the route she always took. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just the bike, standing upright, as though she'd stopped to speak with someone, and never returned. 3 days later, a farmhand named Peter Ward failed to show up for work. His truck was discovered abandoned on the side of Highway 17, keys still in the ignition. And then, most chillingly, 12-year-old Tommy Harris disappeared after riding his bike to a friend's house. The bike was discovered in a drainage ditch. His parents received no ransom note, no calls, nothing. The faceless woman was no longer a story to laugh at. She was real. Fear gripped Coldwell. Parents forbade their children from going out after dark. Doors were locked, windows bolted. Church sermons were filled with warnings about evil walking among the righteous. The local newspaper, the Coldwell Gazette, published a front-page story. Who is the faceless woman? That was the first time the name appeared in print. It stuck. Detective Richard Hayes, a state investigator, was assigned to the case after the disappearance of young Tommy Harris. Hayes was a practical man. He didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, or faceless women, but he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. Interview after interview, the descriptions were consistent. Too consistent. People who had never met, who had no reason to conspire, all described the same figure. A tall woman, a pale dress, a smooth, featureless face. Hayes visited the locations himself. The gas station, the cornfields, the drainage ditch. In each place he felt the same thing, unease, as if someone was watching him from just out of sight. In his report, he wrote, "There is no logical explanation for the consistency of these sightings. Either there is a single suspect deliberately disguising their identity, or something else is happening here. Something I cannot yet explain." By September, Coldwell was no longer the same town. Streets were empty after dark. The diner closed earlier than ever. Radios crackled with rumors. Some claimed the faceless woman was a vengeful spirit. Others whispered she was a victim of a botched medical experiment. escaped and roaming the countryside. And then came the night that changed everything. On September 21st, just after midnight, 2 police officers patrolling near the edge of town spotted a figure standing by the highway, a woman in a pale dress. The officers stopped, shining their flashlights. One of them, Officer Daniels, later recounted, "I thought it was a prank, someone wearing a mask. But when the light hit her, there was nothing there, just skin, like a blank canvas. I froze. I couldn't move." The woman tilted her head as though curious. Then she raised a hand and pointed at the patrol car. The other officer panicked, drew his gun, and fired a warning shot into the air. In that instant, the figure vanished. Not ran, not ducked. She simply disappeared. Both officers resigned within the week. Detective Hayes, meanwhile, dug deeper. He combed through missing persons reports from nearby counties. He found patterns, other towns, other disappearances, stretching back decades. Each cluster of vanishings was followed by whispered rumors of a woman with no face. It was not just Coldwell. She had been seen before. The Faceless Woman was not born in 1974. She had been walking much longer. By late September, Coldwell was no longer a town that felt safe. Curtains stayed drawn. Dogs barked at nothing in the night. Children had nightmares of a woman standing at their windows, faceless and silent, waiting for them to wake. The disappearances did not stop. On September 24th, 41-year-old Gary Peterson failed to return home from his night shift at the paper mill. His pickup truck was discovered parked neatly outside the factory, keys in the ignition. His lunchbox sat unopened on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. It was as if he had stepped out of existence. 2 days later, elderly widow Margaret Ellis was last seen watering her garden just before dusk. Her neighbour, Mrs. Dalton, recalled hearing her humming as she tended her roses. By morning, her yard hose was still running, the water pooling into the soil, but Margaret was gone. It was no longer random. It was deliberate. Detective Richard Hayes began constructing a map of Coldwell, marking each disappearance with a red pin. To his unease, the locations formed a rough crescent around the town, almost as though something, or someone, was drawing a circle. Predatory behavior, Hayes muttered under his breath in his motel room, staring at the map. Closing in, but it wasn't just the vanishings, it was the sightings. Each time someone disappeared, at least one neighbor or passerby reported seeing a pale woman near the location. Always silent, always faceless. When Hayes questioned them, their testimonies chilled him. "She tilted her head, like she was listening," said a farmer who spotted her in his field. "She was pointing at my house," whispered a mother whose daughter vanished the night before. "She didn't walk away. She just faded." The sheriff's department grew restless. They doubled patrols, but officers avoided certain stretches of highway. One deputy outright refused to go near the abandoned Sinclair gas station. He claimed he saw the faceless woman standing inside the broken window, watching him. The gas station became a place of dread. Teenagers dared each other to go there after dark. Some swore they heard footsteps inside, though the building was empty. One boy claimed he heard whispering, though the words made no sense. Hayes visited the station himself. The roof sagged. Weeds split the cracked concrete. Glass crunched under his boots as he pushed open the rusted door. It was silent inside, save for the distant buzz of cicadas. Dust coated the counters. Shelves sat empty, long since stripped bare. But there was something odd. On the far wall, etched into the peeling paint, were scratch marks. Not words, not symbols, just long vertical gouges, as if someone had dragged their nails down the surface again and again. Hayes crouched, tracing them with his gloved fingers. They were fresh. He stepped back, uneasy. For the first time in years, the detective felt fear. Not of criminals, not of losing a case, but of something he couldn't categorize. Something that didn't fit into evidence boxes or reports. That night, he dreamed. He was standing in the cornfields under a pale moon. The stalks rustled, though no wind blew. Ahead, a woman in a pale dress stood with her back to him. Slowly, she turned. Where her face should have been was smooth, stretched skin. No features, no eyes to look into, no mouth to scream from, just emptiness. Hayes jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:12 a.m. He lit a cigarette, staring at the motel ceiling, trying to convince himself it was just a dream. But then came the Harris family. It was October 2nd when Margaret Harris called the sheriff's office, her voice trembling. "She's in our yard," she whispered. "The woman. She's pointing at the house." By the time deputies arrived, there was nothing. But the very next morning, Margaret herself vanished. Her husband found the back door ajar and muddy footprints leading into the house. They stopped at the base of the stairs. And then, nothing. No more prints. No trace of her leaving. Hayes pressed his palms against his temples as he read the report. "She's not just taking them," he muttered. "She's choosing them." The media descended on Coldwell. Reporters swarmed, shoving microphones into the sheriff's face. "Is the Faceless Woman real?" they demanded. "Are these vanishings connected?" The sheriff had no answers. He stammered about ongoing investigations and no confirmation of supernatural involvement, but his eyes betrayed him. He was just as terrified as the townsfolk. Meanwhile, whispers spread. People began to connect the vanishings to older stories. Some remembered their grandparents speaking of a blank woman seen near the mines in the 1940s. Others claimed she haunted the rail tracks after a derailment in 1921, and each tale ended the same way, with people disappearing. By the second week of October, Coldwell was in chaos. Churches held nightly vigils. Gun shops reported record sales. Farmers carried rifles while tending their fields. But the Faceless Woman didn't care. She was seen more often, standing at intersections, waiting by the woods, lurking in fields. She never chased, never attacked. She only appeared, watching, choosing. And then one night, Detective Hayes got his proof. It was October 15th, nearly midnight. Hayes was driving back to his motel after another fruitless interview. As he passed the cornfields, his headlights caught something pale on the road ahead, a woman. He slammed the brakes, heart pounding. She stood in the beam of his headlights, motionless. A pale dress fluttered in the breeze. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. Every instinct screamed to drive, to run her down if he had to, but he froze. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. Even from the car, Hayes saw it. Smooth skin stretched where her face should be. A blank canvas of flesh. His chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. Then she raised her arm and pointed. Not at the car, at him. Hayes gasped, fumbling for his revolver. But in the blink of an eye, the road was empty. The woman was gone. Only silence remained, broken by the frantic thump of his heartbeat. That night, Hayes didn't return to the motel. He drove until sunrise, trying to outrun the image seared into his mind. The Faceless Woman was real, and now she had noticed him. The morning after Detective Richard Hayes' encounter on the road, he looked like a man hollowed out. His eyes were bloodshot, his stubble unshaven, his hands trembling, even as he poured his coffee in the diner across from the sheriff's office. Sheriff Donnelly sat opposite him, chewing nervously on a toothpick. "You look like hell, Hayes." Hayes didn't bother with pleasantries. "I saw her." The sheriff froze. The diner's background chatter seemed to fade. "You... what?" Hayes leaned forward, his voice low, strained. "On County Road 6, midnight, pale dress. No face. Donnelly, she's real. This isn't just hysteria or campfire bullshit." The sheriff shifted uneasily, glancing toward the waitress, who was pretending not to listen. "Careful what you say out loud," Hayes snapped. "Don't give me that, don't you dare. I've seen murder scenes, war zones, things that haunt me, but nothing like this. And now I know why people vanish without a trace. She doesn't need a weapon. She doesn't even need to touch you." She points. Donnelly. She points. And it's like she chooses who goes next. Donnelly rubbed his temples. "Jesus Christ. Before Hayes could press further, the bell over the diner door jingled. A woman entered, clutching a shawl tight around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She walked straight to Hayes's booth. "You're the detective," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Hayes and Donnelly exchanged a glance. Hayes gestured to the seat. "Yeah, who are you?" The woman sat, shaking as though every nerve in her body was on fire. "My name is Evelyn Price, and I know what she looks like because I survived her." Evelyn's story spilled out in broken fragments at first. She was 26, a secretary at the county clerk's office. 2 weeks earlier, she had been driving home from her sister's place when her car broke down on the outskirts of town. "I was trying to fix the damn thing," she whispered, wringing her hands. And then, she was just there, standing by the ditch, watching me. "Faceless?" Hayes asked. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was like she got inside my head and I just froze. Then I heard it. He leaned in. "Heard what?" "A whisper," Evelyn's voice cracked. Not words I understood. Just this rasping hiss, like she was speaking through static. And it felt like it was inside me, crawling under my skin. Hayes shuddered. "What happened next?" Evelyn's eyes darted to the window as though expecting the woman to appear. She pointed at me. My body went numb. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. And then, her voice dropped to a tremor. She started walking closer. Donnelly muttered, "Jesus." Evelyn gripped the edge of the table. I thought I was going to die. But then, right before she reached me, headlights appeared. A truck. She vanished. Like smoke, the diner was silent. Even the clink of dishes in the kitchen seemed distant. Hayes studied Evelyn's trembling hands. This wasn't hysteria. This wasn't attention-seeking. She had seen something real, and he believed her. Later that evening, Hayes visited Evelyn's apartment to get her full statement. The place was in disarray. Curtains nailed shut, lights left on in every room, mirrors covered with blankets. "You think she's still watching you?" Hayes said softly. Evelyn nodded. "She doesn't stop. I hear her sometimes when it's quiet, that whisper. I think she mocked me. I think she wants to finish what she started." Hayes set his recorder on the table. "Evelyn, I need you to tell me everything you can remember, every detail." But as she spoke, something happened. The recorder picked it up first, a faint hiss, barely audible, threading between Evelyn's words. Hayes frowned, tapping the device. "Must be interference," but Evelyn froze, eyes wide. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Hayes stopped the tape. The room was silent, and then, faint but clear, came the same rasping whisper Evelyn had described. It slithered through the air, not from outside, not from the recorder, but from nowhere and everywhere at once. Hayes's blood ran cold. He snapped the recorder shut. Evelyn was shaking violently, clutching her shawl. "She knows," Evelyn sobbed. "She knows I'm talking about her." Hayes tried to reassure her, but his own hands trembled. He'd heard it too. 2 days later, Evelyn vanished. Her apartment was found in the same condition. Lights on, curtains sealed. The front door was locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle. But on the living room wall, scratched deep into the plaster, were 3 words. "I chose her." Hayes stared at the words until his vision blurred. This was no longer an investigation. It was a nightmare unraveling in real time. The Faceless Woman was escalating, and Hayes knew without a shred of doubt that he was next. The day Evelyn Price's disappearance hit the papers, Hayes knew Coldwell had crossed a threshold it could never return from. Her photo sat on the front page of the Coldwell Gazette. Missing. Local woman vanishes under mysterious circumstances. The sheriff gave a predictable statement about no evidence of foul play, but Hayes knew better. Evelyn was gone because she spoke out. The Faceless Woman had silenced her. And then, the tape arrived. It was delivered in an unmarked envelope, slipped under the sheriff's office door sometime during the night. Inside was a plain black cassette. No label, no handwriting, just the tape. Sheriff Donnelly held it gingerly between his fingers. "Sick bastard," he muttered. "Probably some crank." Hayes shook his head. His gut told him otherwise. "No, this is her, or someone who wants us to hear her." They borrowed an old tape deck from evidence storage. The machine whirred, the reels spun, and the tape began to play. At first, there was only static, a long hiss broken by faint crackles. Then faintly, a voice, a woman's voice screaming, Hayes stiffened, recognizing the cry. It was Evelyn. Her terror was raw, animalistic, the kind of scream that came from someone being dragged past the threshold of sanity. Then the screaming stopped. A whisper bled through the static. That same rasping, incomprehensible sound Evelyn had described. Words not meant for human throats. Hayes's skin prickled as it slithered into his ears, burrowing into his mind. The sheriff slammed the stop button, face pale. "Turn it off. Jesus Christ, turn it off." Hayes stared at the machine, jaw tight. "She's sending us proof. Proof she has them." That night, Hayes couldn't sleep. The whisper replayed in his head on a loop, like the tape was still spinning even in silence. At 3 a.m., he lit a cigarette and poured himself whiskey, staring at the motel wallpaper. And then, there was a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. 3 knocks. Hayes froze, ash falling from his cigarette. No one should have been there, not at that hour. He picked up his revolver, creeping toward the door. His breath caught as he saw the envelope on the floor, slid under the door crack. Another tape. Hands shaking, Hayes locked every bolt and chain, then sat on the bed. He loaded the cassette into the player. Click. Whir. This time, the recording began with heavy breathing. A man's voice sobbing, pleading, "Please, please let me go." Hayes's blood ran cold. The voice was Gary Peterson, the paper mill worker who vanished weeks earlier. The man screamed, a wet, choking sound. Then silence, and then came the whisper, louder this time, more insistent. Hayes clutched his ears but couldn't block it out. The words had no meaning, yet carried intent. A choice, a promise. The whisper ended abruptly, and a new sound filled the room, scratching. Long, slow, deliberate scratches, like nails dragging across wood. But it wasn't on the tape. It was inside the motel room. Hayes's head whipped toward the wall. His pulse spiked. There, on the plaster, fresh gouges carved themselves into the surface, one after another, invisible hands raking deep into the wall. Hayes stumbled back, revolver drawn, heart hammering. No. The scratches stopped, and then faintly, the tape spoke one final phrase. "I see you, Richard." The machine clicked off. Hayes dropped to his knees, drenched in sweat. His name. She said his name. The next morning, he brought the tape to the sheriff, but when they played it again in the office, the final phrase was gone. Only static remained after the scratching. Donnelly frowned. "You're cracking up, Hayes. Stress is making you hear things." But Hayes knew the truth. She was playing with him, testing him. By the end of that week, 3 more tapes arrived. Each one worse than the last. One contained the faint sound of a baby crying, then abruptly cut to silence. Another had Margaret Harris's voice whispering, "She's inside the house," before a blood-curdling shriek. The third was nothing but 20 minutes of the Faceless Woman's whisper, so loud and sharp that deputies who listened claimed to feel dizzy and nauseous afterward. The sheriff ordered the tapes locked in evidence, but Hayes couldn't let them go. He listened again and again, searching for meaning in the static, and he found something. Hidden beneath the whisper, buried deep in the hiss, was a pattern, numbers, coordinates. Hayes scrawled them on a map, his pulse racing. The points formed a trail leading out of town, into the old abandoned mines on the edge of Coldwell. The mines had been closed since the 1950s after a collapse killed 14 workers. No one went near them anymore, but the tapes wanted him to. That night, Hayes packed his revolver, a flashlight, and the map. He knew it was reckless, maybe even suicidal, but he also knew one thing. If the Faceless Woman wanted him to come, he had no choice. And deep down, some part of him was terrified to admit he wanted to see her again. The abandoned Coldwell mines loomed like a scar on the earth. Rusted fencing leaned inward, its no trespassing signs bleached white by decades of sun. The entrance gaped open, a black mouth swallowing the last light of evening. Detective Richard. Hayes stood at the threshold, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The coordinates from the tapes had led him here. Each tape seemed like breadcrumbs, pulling him deeper into something that was no longer just a case. The whisper was already in his ears, not from the wind, not from the trees. It was inside his skull, a crawling susurration that urged him forward. He took a drag from his cigarette, flicked the ember into the dirt, and stepped inside. The air in the mine was damp and suffocating. smelling of earth and rust. Water dripped from the ceiling in uneven intervals, each drop echoing like a clock tick. His flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing crumbling wooden supports and jagged walls. Hayes's boots crunched on gravel as he moved deeper. With every step, the whisper grew louder, like something guiding him. He came to a split tunnel. On the left wall, fresh scratches marked the stone. Vertical gouges, deep and deliberate. They looked almost like tally marks. Hayes followed them. After nearly an hour of weaving through collapsed passages, he found it. A chamber deep within the mine, far from where anyone should have been, and in the center of the chamber stood a crude altar. It was made of stacked stones, stained black as though soaked with something that wasn't water. Around it, dozens of rusted lanterns lay in a circle, their cracked glass reflecting his flashlight. But what froze him wasn't the altar. It was the faces. Dozens of photographs, some yellowed with age, others recent, pinned to the walls with rusty nails. Men, women, children. All Coldwell residents, some of them already known as missing persons. Their photos had been defaced. Eyes scratched out, mouths torn away. Hayes's stomach churned. He recognized Evelyn's picture among them, pinned dead center. And below the photos, carved into the stone floor, was a symbol, a crude circle with intersecting lines, like a wheel with too many spokes. Hayes crouched, running his fingers along the grooves. The cuts were fresh. Someone, or something, had been here recently. Then he saw the notebook. It lay on the altar, its pages warped with dampness. Hayes opened it carefully, shining his light on the scrawled handwriting inside. It wasn't a diary. It was a ritual manual. The entries described the woman without face, a spirit of vengeance bound to Coldwell since the early 1900s. According to the text, she was once a real woman, name lost to time, who had been brutally murdered by a mob after being accused of witchcraft. The mob had cut off her face to steal her voice from the devil, but instead of destroying her, they unleashed her. Her body was dumped into the Coldwell mines, and from there, she became something else, something eternal. The ritual claimed that she required offerings, faces, lives, to remain in the world. Each disappearance wasn't random, it was a debt. Hayes's hand trembled as he flipped through the pages. At the back of the notebook was a chilling passage, underlined 3 times. Once she chooses you, there is no escape. To speak her name aloud is to invite her. To see her face is to surrender your own. Hayes slammed the book shut, his heart pounding. A sound echoed behind him. Footsteps. He whipped around, flashlight shaking. The beam landed on the tunnel. Empty. Hello? His voice cracked. No reply, just the faintest scrape, like nails dragging across stone. Hayes raised his revolver. Show yourself. Silence. Then his flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then went out. Darkness swallowed him whole. The whisper surged, not faint now, not distant. It was all around him, vibrating the walls, burrowing into his skull. He clutched his ears and stumbled backward, his breath ragged, and then he saw her. She didn't walk into the chamber. She was simply there. A pale figure in the dark, her dress trailing across the stone floor. Her body shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. Hayes's breath caught as the beam of his dying flashlight revealed her head. No eyes, no mouth, no face. Just smooth, pale skin, stretched tight where features should have been. Hayes froze. The notebook's words burned in his mind. To see her face is to surrender your own. The faceless woman raised an arm and pointed. At him, Hayes's limbs locked. His revolver slipped from his hand, clattering against the stone. His body shook violently, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream. The whisper filled his skull, louder than ever. For a moment, he swore he understood it. Not words, but intent. A message. You are mine now. The air turned ice cold. His vision blurred. He felt his own face, his skin tightening, his lips trembling, his eyes burning, like something was trying to peel him away from himself. And then, headlights, a voice, shouting, "Hayes!" The paralysis broke. The faceless woman flickered, her body dissolving into shadow. She vanished. Hayes collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating Sheriff Donnelly standing in the tunnel, his gun drawn. "What the hell are you doing down here?" Donnelly demanded. Hayes could barely speak. She was here. But when Donnelly shone his own light around the chamber, the altar was gone. The photos were gone. The scratches, the symbol, everything. The chamber was bare rock. Only the notebook remained in Hayes's hands. That night, Hayes sat alone in his motel, the notebook open on the table. The sheriff had already warned him. "Drop this case, Hayes. It's eating you alive." But Hayes couldn't. The ritual was real. The faceless woman was real, and if the notebook was right, she wasn't done with Coldwell. The last page carried one final line, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "When the circle closes, the town will be hers." Hayes stared at the words until dawn, because he finally understood. The disappearances weren't random. They were a ritual, and Coldwell itself was the offering. The motel room, 3:12 a.m. Detective Richard Hayes sat hunched over the small table, the motel's buzzing neon sign bleeding red light through the curtains. The ritual notebook lay open before him, its warped pages splayed like rotten wings. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. That blank, smooth skin where a human face should be. That gesture, her arm rising, finger pointing, branding him as hers. The words in the book replayed in his mind. To see her face is to surrender your own. When the circle closes, the town will be hers. Hayes dragged a trembling hand over his own face, half expecting to feel nothing but raw skin. But his features were still there. For now, he took a gulp of whiskey, the burn keeping him tethered to the world. His revolver lay on the table, cleaned, reloaded, polished. It felt pitiful. What good was a bullet against something like her? Still, Hayes knew one thing. He wasn't walking away. If Coldwell was going to burn, he'd burn with it, but not before trying to stop her. The sheriff's warning morning brought rain, heavy sheets pelting the streets of Coldwell. Sheriff Donnelly stormed into the motel, his uniform damp, his patience gone. "You've lost it, Hayes," Donnelly barked, slamming the door shut. "You're talking about witches, rituals, faceless women. Do you even hear yourself?" Hayes shoved the notebook toward him. "It's all here. Every disappearance, every case file. It's not coincidence. The mine is the center. It always has been." Donnelly refused to look at the book. "This town has lived with superstition long enough. I'm not letting you stir it up again. Drop the case." Hayes leaned forward, voice gravel. "You saw the chamber. You saw my face when I came out of there. You think I made that up?" Donnelly's jaw tightened. For a moment, the tough sheriff cracked, his eyes betraying fear. "I saw nothing," he said finally, "and neither did you." Then he left. The tape's return, Hayes thought the tapes were finished. But that night, another one appeared. It was waiting on the hood of his car, wrapped in brown paper. No note, just the tape. He almost didn't play it. His stomach roiled as he slid it into the recorder. The static hissed, then a voice, a woman's voice, low and wet, as though speaking through water. "You've seen me." Hayes's blood froze. "You belong to me now. One more, Richard. One more face, and the circle will close." The tape clicked off. Hayes slammed his fist against the recorder, but the whisper was already in the room with him, crawling under his skin. The town fractures by the next morning. Coldwell was unraveling. 2 more people vanished overnight. A mother and her teenage son, last seen walking home from church. Their shoes were found neatly placed on their doorstep. Residents gathered at the diner, whispering, praying, accusing. Some blamed outsiders. Some said the devil had returned. Others spoke openly of her. The faceless woman. Hayes sat at the counter, coffee cold in his hands. He heard their fear, their desperation, their surrender. And then the waitress leaned close, whispering as if afraid the walls might hear. "They say she walks Main Street at night, that if you look out your window, she's standing there, waiting for you." Hayes pushed the coffee away and left. He had one plan left. Preparing the trap, the notebook wasn't just warnings. It contained rituals, counter-rituals, ways to bind her. One page, written in a trembling hand, described a ritual of containment. A circle of salt, a mirror for her prison, blood to call her forth, fire to seal the bond. Hayes circled the instructions with his pen. It was insane, but insanity was all that was left. He raided the local hardware store. Bags of rock salt, lantern oil, rope, nails, a pane of mirror glass. He carried them to the abandoned church on the edge of town, its roof half collapsed, pews coated in dust. If there was anywhere to confront her, it was here, a house of God, long forgotten. By nightfall, he had his trap prepared, a circle of salt, wide enough to encompass the altar he'd dragged inside. The mirror pane propped upright facing the circle, lanterns filled with oil ready to ignite, and at the center, a shallow cut across his palm, his own blood. Hayes sat in the dark church, revolver across his lap, waiting. The summoning midnight. The storm outside rattled the stained glass. The town slept uneasily. Hayes lit the lanterns, their glow flickering across the ruined church walls. He stepped into the circle, pressed his bleeding hand to the altar, and whispered the words from the notebook. I call you forth. I give you my face if you'll take it. I bind you here. The air thickened instantly. The whisper surged. The lantern flames guttered, bending toward the mirror. The salt hissed like water on fire. And then, she was there. The faceless woman stood just beyond the circle, her dress dragging across the cracked floorboards. Her head tilted, smooth skin gleaming in the lantern light. Hayes's breath caught. She was more solid now, more present. The air reeked of rot. You called, she whispered, not with a mouth but inside his skull. Hayes gripped his revolver. You want me? Then come take me. She stepped forward. Her foot hit the salt line. The circle flared, sparks spitting into the air. She recoiled, hissing, body flickering. Hayes's hope surged. The trap was working. He raised the mirror, forcing it toward her. This is your prison, he snarled. Back to where you came from. Her body convulsed. The whisper became a scream. She lunged, striking the circle, but the salt burned her, pinning her outside. The church shook. The lanterns toppled. Fire licked across the floorboards. Hayes pressed harder, shouting the final words. In the name of the forgotten, I bind you. Her form stretched, unraveling like smoke. The mirror shook in his hands, its glass vibrating with impossible force. And then, silence. She was gone. The mirror's surface rippled once, then went still. Hayes collapsed, chest heaving. He'd done it. The twist, the fire spread quickly, devouring the dry wood of the church. Hayes stumbled outside, the mirror under his arm, coughing smoke from his lungs. The storm had stopped. The night was eerily calm. He set the mirror down in the grass, staring at his reflection. His own face stared back, pale, bloodied, exhausted. But then, his reflection blinked and smiled. Hayes stumbled back. The reflection didn't move with him. It pressed a hand against the inside of the glass, faceless skin stretching across its features before reshaping into his own face again. The whisper returned, not faint, not distant, inside him. You can't bind what already owns you. Hayes dropped to his knees, clutching his head. His face felt wrong, skin tightening, features trembling as though slipping. From within the mirror, his reflection whispered one last time. The circle is closed. And then the glass shattered. The shards scattered across the grass, each one catching his reflection. Dozens of little Hayeses, all smiling. Behind him, Coldwell slept. Unaware, but not for long. The morning after Coldwell awoke to smoke drifting from the old church ruins. The sheriff and a few locals gathered, shaking their heads at the charred wreckage. They didn't find Hayes inside. They didn't find anyone, but Hayes was still there, just not the Hayes they knew. He walked Main Street at dawn, soot on his coat, shards of glass in his pockets. His steps felt heavy, not entirely his own. People stared at him, and then quickly looked away. Something was wrong. They didn't want to admit it, but they felt it. When Hayes waved, the grocer across the street froze. For just a second, Hayes's face slipped. The grocer swore he saw nothing but smooth, pale skin, where eyes and mouth should have been. By the time he blinked, Hayes's face was back, smiling, The disappearances escalate. The vanishings increased. Children missing from locked bedrooms. Farmers vanishing from their fields. The town drunk gone from his usual stool outside the tavern. And always, their shoes left behind. Sheriff Donnelly tried to keep order, but fear hollowed Coldwell out from the inside. People locked their doors, boarded their windows. Some fled town entirely. Those who stayed whispered of a curse fulfilled, of her circle closing. And every rumor, every whispered fear, pointed back to one man, Detective Richard Hayes. Hayes's journal 3 days later. A boy found Hayes's notebook discarded in the woods. The final entries were nearly illegible, written in a trembling hand. The trap failed, or worse, it worked too well. I feel her moving beneath my skin, smiling when I smile, breathing when I breathe. The mirror didn't hold her, it made her. She is me now. The circle is nearly closed. The offering must be complete. The last page was smeared with blood, the words carved into the paper so deep they nearly tore through. To end it, I must give her the town. The festival Coldwell had one tradition left untouched by the terror, the annual Harvest Festival. That year, many begged the mayor to cancel it, but tradition won. If we cancel, he said, fear has already beaten us, so the festival went on. Lanterns were strung across Main Street. A bonfire was built. Children wore paper masks, playing games under watchful eyes. Music played, though hollow and strained, and Hayes was there. He walked among them, smiling, laughing, his coat buttoned tight despite the chill. People avoided his eyes. Mothers pulled children closer, yet no one stopped him. No one dared. As night deepened, the bonfire roared. And that's when it began. The offering. The flames bent suddenly, unnaturally toward the crowd. Lanterns flickered out. The air thickened with a stench of wet earth and rot. Hayes stepped forward. Slowly. Deliberately. He raised his hands, palms outward, like a preacher blessing his congregation. His voice was calm, but it echoed in every head. She has waited. She has chosen. Tonight the circle closes. The crowd froze. Some screamed. Some dropped to their knees. Others tried to flee. But the exits from Main Street seemed swallowed by shadow. And then they saw her. Not just Hayes, but her, standing in his place. Her faceless head tilting, her dress dragging across the pavement, her finger pointing at each of them in turn. The crowd erupted in chaos. The mirror shards, the bonfire cracked, embers swirling into the sky. Hayes, or what wore Hayes, reached into his coat and drew out a shard of the mirror he had carried from the church. The glass pulsed like a living heart. One by one, the townsfolk saw their own reflections in the shard, not smiling but blank, faceless, their features erased, and when they saw it, they screamed. Their faces slid away, skins smoothing over as though wiped clean. Shoes dropped to the ground. Bodies vanished into thin air. The offering had begun. Donnelly's stand sheriff Donnelly shoved through the crowd, revolver drawn, shouting over the chaos. "Hayes! Stop this madness!" But Hayes only smiled. His face flickered, smooth for a moment, then back again. Donnelly fired. The bullet struck Hayes square in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall. He laughed. The sound was wrong, layered, wet, a chorus of whispers inside one throat. You can't kill what isn't yours anymore. Donnelly fired again and again. Hayes didn't bleed. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, pressing the mirror shard into Donnelly's chest. The sheriff gasped, his gun clattering to the ground. His face melted, slipping into nothing, before his body vanished entirely. Another offering taken. The circle closes panic consumed the town. Families fled into the night, but the shadows followed. Every reflection, windows, puddles, shards of glass, caught their faces, stripped them away, fed them to her. By dawn, Main Street was silent. Shoes littered the pavement. The bonfire smoldered, ashes drifting like snow. And Hayes stood alone, or rather, the thing wearing Hayes stood there, smiling. The final broadcast weeks later, when Coldwell was nearly deserted, a radio transmission crackled unexpectedly across the county airwaves. It was Hayes's voice, calm, even friendly. "Good evening, listeners. Tonight's broadcast is dedicated to the ones who stayed, and to the ones who gave themselves to her. The Faceless Woman thanks you." A pause. Look in the mirror. She's waiting. The signal cut. Epilogue. Coldwell never recovered. The disappearances were never explained. The government sealed the mine, demolished the ruins, and warned people away. But travelers still tell stories of a town where shoes lie in neat rows outside empty houses, of a faceless woman seen drifting along the highway at night, of a detective who smiled as he invited her in and gave her everything. And sometimes, on late-night radio, a voice still whispers, "The circle is closed."